I want to share with you throughout this reflection the words of Elandria Williams. She also went by E. Elandria Williams was born in 1979. She was a Unitarian Universalist. In 2017, she became co-moderator of the Unitarian Universalist Association. I met her, knew her, worked with her once or twice, not closely, but we were acquaintances. She was fast-talking and smart and, her wit. She was so sharp. And she died in September of 2020. But in that short life, she gave so much to this association. Just briefly, I'll tell you, she was a founding member of Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. She served on the board of what was then known as the Thomas Jefferson District and their anti-racism transformation team. She was a young Black woman, I should add. She was on the Southern Region organizing, consulting for the UUA Young Adult Office. She trained on chaplaincy and leadership development, and she was twice the General Assembly coordinator for DRUM, Diverse and Revolutionary Unitarian Universalist Ministries. She wrote these words that I feel the need to share with you today. And so I'm going to use her words throughout this, and I'm just going to tell you when I begin. We are worthy. We are worthy not because of what we produce, but because of who we are. We are divine bodies of light and darkness. You are not worthy because of what you offer, nor because of what is in your mind, nor for the support you give others, not for what you give at all. We are worthy and are whole just because in this great turning, in this great pandemic, in this radical readjustment and realignment, we are not disposable. We are needed. We are the very people who have withstood everything that has been thrown at us as a people. And as Maya Angelou would say, still I rise. We arise from the pain. We arise from the grief. We arise from the limits people place on us and the limits we place on ourselves. We rise to be the children and the ancestors. We rise to be our true selves in relationship to families and communities, recognizing our liberating and whole selves, honoring them and others as we strive for abundant communities, abundant lives, abundant relationships, abundant values, and cultural manifestations. We are worthiness personified. We are worthy and deserve a life where we are not always fighting for our existence. Audre Lorde was born in New York City. She became a writer, a poet, an activist. She traveled the world studying other cultures and the ways that women and lesbians and other people, those perceived as other, live their lives and how to do so fully and beautifully. I want to read you an excerpt from an essay she wrote called The Erotic as Power. The erotic is a resource within each of us that lies in a deeply female and spiritual plane, firmly rooted in the power of unexpressed or unrecognized feelings. During World War II, we bought tiny sealed plastic packets of white, uncolored margarine with a tiny, intense pellet of yellow coloring perched like a topaz just inside the clear skin of the bag. We would leave the margarine out for a while to soften, and then we would pinch the little pellet to break it inside the bag, releasing the rich yellowness into the soft, pale mass of margarine. Then taking it carefully between our fingers, we would knead it gently back and forth over and over until the color had spread through the whole pound bag of margarine, thoroughly coloring it. I find the erotic such a kernel within myself. When released from its intense and constrained pellet, it flows through and colors my life with a kind of energy that heightens and sensitizes and strengthens all my experience. Beyond the superficial, the considered phrase, "it feels right to me," acknowledges the strength of the erotic into a true knowledge. And for what that means is the first and most powerful guiding light toward any understanding. Understanding is a handmaiden which can only wait upon or clarify that knowledge, which is deeply born. The erotic is the nurturer and nursemaid of all our deepest knowledge. I've been thinking a lot about bodies. You could blame it on having been sick a few weeks ago and my intense dissatisfaction with my own body's perceived betrayal. Or you could blame it on I've been doing reading in some of my own old seminary stuff, and you could blame it on all the talk of the Trinity that I suffered through. So questions of Jesus' humanity have included, did Jesus poop? Apparently, this was a big topic of discussion in the first century. I've also been thinking about women's bodies. As we know, Roe v. Wade was overturned. We have had our access to reproductive care and health taken away, particularly those on the margins. And particularly people on the margins are vulnerable in their bodies and in their selves. Those with visible differences such as dark skin, religious garb, physical disability, these all make us vulnerable to others' hate and fear. And of course, I've been thinking of the bodies of the poor in this country and around the world. Healthcare here is often presented to us as a luxury. And of course, we see the difficulties that are being created in Turkey and Syria as we try to get health and hope to people who are marginalized, people who have no access, people who are poor by standards that we simply don't understand in the United States. Most of us. Some do. Our bodies are important, and our bodies are in danger. But our bodies are also beautiful and powerful. And as Audre Lorde says in her essay, they are deeply erotic. They are able to be informed by pleasure and satisfaction, not only in the ways that we commonly consider pleasure and satisfaction as sexual experiences, but throughout our lived experiences outside the bedroom as well. Eros, which we often think of as romantic love only, sexual love, is actually life love. It is the creative power of life. And its opposite is, if you're a Marvel fan, you will enjoy this, Thanos, which is death energy. Eros and Thanos. Audre Lorde was a queer black feminist and activist. She was born in Harlem to parents who had immigrated from the Caribbean. She lived her whole life freely and fiercely and unapologetically. Reading her autobiographical memoirs, I think it's reasonable to conclude that she probably had some learning disabilities, or not even disabilities, differences. She was neurodivergent, and for her words, when she finally came to them at about the age of 5, became everything in the way that she related to the world. I go back to her poems and her essays again and again, and every time I find something new. The essay, The Erotic as Power, reminds me of the times when I found most powerful and most passionate in my own body. When singing, when running, I used to run, when dancing, making art, when walking with others for a cause, and yes, during fun grown-up times that I'm not going to share with you. But it's good to be reminded that our feelings of intense pleasure and satisfaction aren't just limited to the bedroom, that this informs us throughout our days. Lorde singles out the erotic power as being the provenance of women, and I challenge that. I don't agree with that. I believe the experience of the erotic is a human trait. It's divorced from age, ability, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity. Lorde was writing before ideas of gender and sexuality were as freely spoken of as they are today. One of my deepest hopes for the gender revolution that we find ourselves in today is that it will grant men more freedom to experience and celebrate the erotic, an experience magnitudes deeper and richer than the experience of the merely pornographic. Lorde says that pornography is a direct denial of the power of the erotic, for it represents the suppression of true feeling. Pornography emphasized sensation without feeling. And she writes this: there are frequent attempts to conflate and equate pornography and eroticism, two diametrically opposed uses of the sexual. Because of these attempts, it has become fashionable to separate the spiritual, psychic, emotional, from the political, to see them as contradictory or antithetical. In the same way, we have attempted to separate the spiritual and the erotic, thereby reducing the spiritual to a world of flattened affect, the world of the ascetic who feels nothing, or who aspires to feel nothing. The ascetic, but nothing is further from the truth, she writes, for the ascetic position is one of the highest fear, the gravest immobility. Again, I'm not sure she's correct, but I enjoy what she says. It makes you think. The severe abstinence of the ascetic becomes the ruling obsession, and it is not one of self-discipline, but of self-abnegation. The dichotomy between the spiritual and the political is also false, resulting from an incomplete attention to our erotic knowledge. For the bridge that connects them is formed by the erotic, the sensual, those physical, emotional, and psychic expressions of what is deepest and strongest and richest within each of us, being shared, the passions of love in its deepest and widest expressions. For me, reading this speaks to two important Unitarian Universalist values: the inherent worth and dignity of each person, in which we trust ourselves, which necessarily includes trusting our bodies and our intuitions. The other UU idea that Audre Lorde centers for me is the first of our sources of wisdom, the acknowledgement that everyone has individual access to the mystery and wonder and awe that are part and parcel of life. Every person, however raised, babies aren't Buddhists, but when they grow up, we all experience the beauty of the world for ourselves. I've had experiences that I would call transcendent, most often related to music and singing, and every one of them has involved not only my brain and my heart, but also my body. Not just my voice or the voices of others or the instruments, but a whole body experience that was so intense, and it's been so meaningful that at those moments, I feel emptied out and hollowed as though something greater were coming out through me. And those moments shine in my memory, and they refuse to be forgotten. One of the clearest was a junior high choir concert. But that memory still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I still catch my breath. It was that powerful. My whole body wakes up when I think about it. One of the things that's always frustrated me about the cultural and religious views of humanity that we have here in the Western world is this overt and covert disdain that we have for the body, for our bodies, which are messy and cantankerous and unpredictable and weird and sometimes gross or sometimes amazing. We don't know. But we have this false binary of body versus mind or soul, and it's embedded within our cultural consciousness going back to the time of Jesus and well before. You can find it in the Greek ideas of, binaries and dualities, the Gnostic Gospels, for instance. Much of the mind-body divide that we still rescue is the heritage of those Greek philosophical ideas. And you can read about the controversies and the heresies that promoted this divide and often led to bloodshed throughout that early history. If you just want to Google some fun words, look for Docetism, the Donatist heresy, Gnosticism. And I have to say, personally, I've never really seen the point of that divide, of that arbitrary division. Anyone who believes in the life of the mind separate from body has never seen me and how quickly I change if you feed me. I think this is also why I personally don't have an expectation of an afterlife, or I'm certainly agnostic about it, because it feels like an erasure of the fact that my mind is dependent upon my body. That's just me, though. So having established that it is right and good and proper to celebrate the body, its sensuality, its sensation, its power and connectedness to the world, to our souls, the next question that inevitably arises is, what do we do when our bodies fail us? Because they do. And they will. Like everything else in the world, our bodies are ephemeral. Even with the best of care, we are not immortal. For some of us, the betrayals of time come early. We experience disability from birth or due to accident, circumstance beyond our control. For some of us, many of us, especially with those of us who are privileged to have access to medical science, the breakdown of the body comes later. We age and our bodies and minds change. Our skin loses its elasticity. Our joints ache. Our bones become brittle. We forget things. We misplace keys. We can't hear the bats fluttering around the streetlights at night anymore. So how do we respond to the betrayal of our frail bodies? They're beautiful but also impermanent. We cannot be separated from the bodies we inhabit. We are impermanent. I'm going to tell you a quick story. Every Thursday when I was in seminary, I would go upstairs to a silent sitting meditation. Take off your shoes, sit cross-legged on a cushion, the leader taps a gong, and everyone present, usually there were 4 or 5 of us, maybe 3 or 4, would close their eyes and sit silently for 25 minutes. It's a big test for me. I have a hard time being quiet. But there was a woman who came each week. Her name was Suzanne. She was a secretary for one of the deans. She was this thin little woman with gray hair, very sweet smile. And my interactions with her were basically limited to the occasional, I need to give you this paper for the dean, and sitting in silence together. We didn't talk a lot. Last week, well, no, at this time it wasn't last week, it was longer ago, I found a newspaper story from the Fort Worth paper that featured my friend Suzanne from Silent Sitting. And here's what it said, pared down a little bit. Suzanne Stone, 62, finished the blank half marathon last weekend with a time of 5 hours and 5 minutes. She walked most of it. Suzanne has glioblastoma, an incurable form of brain cancer. The survival average from the time of diagnosis is 14 months. Suzanne was diagnosed 27 months ago. This is directly from the news story. On race day, she started strong, alternating between jogging and walking, but at 8 miles, she realized she was leaning to the right. And at first, she wondered if it was because of the wind. Then she discovered she couldn't straighten her body no matter how she tried. And she kept going anyway. At 11 miles, alerted by other runners, Cowtown volunteers at a medical station gave her salt tablets and helped her onto an exam table. They tried to help straighten her body. She considered giving up. Before the race, I told my husband that if I couldn't finish, I would just let them take me off the course, she said. But I had made it to 11 miles. I was so close. I told the volunteers I didn't want to quit. A first-year medical student named Craig Maples was the first to reach Stone around mile 12, and he saw right away that she was listing hard to the right. He quickly assessed her for signs of stroke. She had not suffered one, he concluded, but he worried she would fall. She told me she was determined to finish, Maples said. I said, if that's what you want to do, I'll try to help you do it. And she hooked her arm through mine, and we started walking. Meanwhile, the workers notified Charles Nichols, an assistant professor of physical therapy who was volunteering at the medical tent, and he also sent medical students to meet Suzanne and assist her to the finish line. So, just before she reached the 13-mile mark, she met 2 physical therapy students, Colton Foster and Marie McDonald, who took her arms and supported her as she approached the finish line. She ran across it, walked across it on her own, and then they took her arms again and took her to the medical tent. They found her husband and said she's in the medical tent, and she did finish, and come see her. They supported me mentally and physically across that finish line, Suzanne said. I really wanted to finish, and I'm so very grateful they were there to help me do that. Suzanne died a couple of months later, which she had known. I had been sitting with her in silent sitting for 2 years. I had no idea about any of this. Talk about your bodily reactions. I was at Bright for 26 months at that point. I'd sat next to her weekly during most of the semesters. It never occurred to me that she had a fatal, incurable cancer, or that she was determined to finish a half marathon, or that she was hoping to go see the solar eclipse. She missed it. That's okay. I can't ask her, though, even when she was here with me and I could talk to her, I couldn't ask her what it is like. What empathy and curiosity and imagination can't tell me, I will not know until and unless I have to cope with my own body. Well, definitely until. I have to deal with my own body's impermanence, with its frailties and its vulnerabilities, and the same is true for us all. So how do we hold that sort of sorrow and fear that often attend our mortality, in tension with the beauty and the sensuality and the power of those bodies? Albert Camus, when asked why he didn't despair, when he cried why to the universe, he received no reply. He said the other question he always asked is, why not? And that's the only really satisfying answer I have found to both sorrow and joy, mourning and celebration. We can cry out why, and we can answer ourselves, why not? Audre Lorde died of cancer in 1992. She had battled the disease in various forms for 14 years, and at a certain point when the possible cures became more unbearable than the treatment, she made the decision to live her last months fully, without treatment, writing, speaking, and fighting till the end. She wrote a book called The Cancer Journals, and she was the New York Poet Laureate for the last 2 years of her life, even though she had moved to the Caribbean. Lorde said, "What I leave behind has a life of its own. I've said it about poetry. I've said it about my children. Well, in a sense, I'm saying it about the very artifact of who I have been." She was 58 years old when she died. Her words, her life, those artifacts that she bequeathed us, the poems, the writings, they remind us again and again that bodies are important, that bodies matter. To say yes to a person's inherent worth and dignity, to say yes to their individual experience of wonder, these are not somehow separate from saying yes to our bodies and with our bodies. The ways that we treat bodies, our own, and especially the bodies of the vulnerable and the frail, can reflect our most miserable failings and our most powerful hopes and aspirations. Audre Lorde once more. We have been raised to fear the yes within ourselves. The fear of our desires keeps them suspect and indiscriminately powerful, for to suppress any truth is to give it strength beyond endurance. When we live outside ourselves, and by that I mean on external directives rather than from our internal knowledge and needs. When we live away from those erotic guides from within ourselves, then our lives are limited by external and alien forms. But when we begin to live from within outward, in touch with the power of the erotic within ourselves, and allowing that power to inform and illuminate our actions on the world around us, then we begin to be responsible to ourselves in the deepest sense. To me, this sounds like the creation of integrity, of being the same as you are on the inside as you are on the outside. Our acts against oppression, she writes, become integral with self, motivated and empowered from within. In touch with the erotic, I become less willing to accept powerlessness or those other supplied states of being which are not native to me, such as resignation, despair, self-effacement, depression, or self-denial. Lord's body of work, pun entirely intended, speaks passionately and deeply about her understanding of not only the power of our bodies, but the frailties with which we struggle. It's not a battle we will win. We are mortal. But I would submit to you, it is that very mortality which is a gift. We are most alive when we recognize that life is not eternal. We are most empowered when we release the false belief that power can be grasped and used forever. There comes a time when we will recognize, as Audre Lorde did, that the things we leave behind, our poetry, our children, our relationships, are limited. Because it is impossible, really, to imagine a world without ourselves in it, we will mourn ourselves. But fear will only take us so far. In Audre Lorde and other humans we lift up and lionize, we see the power in our bodies and in our minds, and it is just as meaningful as our powerlessness. And so we can ask, as Camus did, why? And in the silence, which most often greets that question, we can also answer, as he did and as Audre Lorde did, powerful in her body, why not? And now I will share the closing words from Elandria Williams. Imagine what we could create if we were not always in the struggle. Imagine what we could envision if we could just be let to just go there. So tired of always having to resist, to fight, demanding, pushing to everyone that has the courage, the power, the ability to co-create what we want and what we need while rooting in what we can't lose and who we are. You are the visionary. You are the hope. You are our ancestors' dreams. No, you might not ever end up on some list somewhere, but you are on a list in someone's heart or mind, and it's in how you move in the world so people can see by your example. You are the embodiment of all that we need. Thanks to all that are the embodiment not of productivity, but the embodiment of radical love, care, sanctuary. It's time. Embodiment time. Embodiment. Living one's values out loud. Let me live every day my values out loud. Let us live every day our values out loud. Let us embody them. Not the productivity quotient, beyond productivity, past productivity, true embodiment, life. Amen, and blessed be.